Jessica's getting us set up. We're online. We're going to pray for the Cinderellas today.
She's had 1 4-ounce bottle, I think, here tonight, which is not
No.
enough, so it's going to be at least tomorrow before they get released. Okay. Yeah, she's missing an enzyme that breaks down like her reserve fat, so she doesn't eat. Most people, their reserve fat kicks in, but for them, it doesn't. So a cold for most people isn't that big a deal, but it, like, they won't eat.
Right.
Have to go under special care.
I know also if they do had ever gained weight, it's almost impossible
Yeah.
to get it off, because your body won't tell it to run.
I think that's what I've got.
I was gonna
Nobody
say,
ever diagnosed. Finally, I keep thinking it's the thyroid. Chicken again?
We'll take care of it. Does anybody have any Sunday school?
Not making light, but
No, I
I don't know where her basket is.
it's got to be something.
gotta be, I know.
Well, you know, I think I told the story, when I went to get checked, I had coronavirus.
Right,
I also had flu B.
Right.
So, if I got better, I said, so you better, I said, yes. You can't eat.
Yeah.
right.
So I forced myself to eat.
Well,
Plus, I went to coronavirus before, and all one.
Chris, I can finish our book. Just leave it
I'll
there.
give you family.
Lori reminded me that Valerie's going to have surgery on the 16th on her other foot, right? On her big toe, yeah. So we'll remember Valerie. We've got Mikey recovering.
You do good.
Yeah. We got Hazley with a virus with a little fever. Hudson Pace.
What is the latest?
I'm not on Facebook, but he's not doing well. His numbers are coming down though. Mr. Brill,
Yeah, the leukemia came back, but the numbers were really high when it came back. But over the last week, here, Dolores, I'll take it. But the numbers over the last week have really dropped like miraculously, but he's still in a tough spot.
very sick.
I just can't imagine being off at the hospital as long as, you know, we have occasions with the girls where they have to go for a day or two, and it rocks everybody. I just can't imagine being separated.
Yeah, that's,
I just can't.
there is
Nobody
no,
needs to live in
there's
the
no
hospital.
good place to be.
No.
Because when you're here, you're thinking about there, and it's just, we just had no idea what you're living through.
We just can't imagine, can we? Anybody else? Next. Debbie Wilkins is going to be having surgery on her tendon fracture this week.
Adam Solomon has a kidney stone that's too big to pass. They had to go in yesterday morning and put in a stent, which also sounds terrible. So he could use your prayers.
Yes. Chris, will you open us?
Lord, thank you so much for your blessings. We think of Hudson and what all him and his family are going through, Lord, comfort them, heal them. Lord, for others that we've lifted up that are going in for surgery, Debbie and Valerie, there are others that are sick. Thank you that you're healing Mikey. We pray for Hazley. And we'll forget others, Lord, that we love, know and love. And we ask you, Lord, to help us to remember to be you for them. Help us to study your word this morning, learn more about you, grow closer to you. We pray that the Holy Spirit will empower James to teach from your word.
Who's ready for this lesson today? Ready to talk about the Sabbath day, right? So, obedience and rest is the title of the lesson. How many of us need to be reminded to rest? Jessica just raised her hand. Benny raised your hand for you if you didn't know it or not.
Well, him too.
Yeah.
Great vote.
We have a meeting, people like us, we have a lazy boy that as soon
That's
as
true.
it reminds us.
That's true. It's the switch.
Yeah, it's the off switch,
It's
is
the
all
off
it is.
But it's good to the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know very well if I get to that chair, what's going to happen. And sometimes I have to keep myself from getting to the chair to get anything done.
See, I've always laughed at him because it doesn't matter what time he comes in. He's gonna sit in his chair before he goes to bed. And I'm like, why don't you just go to bed?
She tells me this, well, if you're going to lay there, or you're just going to sit there and go to sleep, why don't you just get ready for
That's
bed?
what I tell him.
No.
He says, I've got to relax in my chair.
You gotta unwind. That's
I
right.
take a nap on my love seat before I go to bed.
There you go. See, Sharon. So, God gave instructions for Israel. That's what we're going to read today. He gave it to Moses up on the mountain. This was, again, part of the Big Ten. Everything that we've studied about in obedience so far is reflected back onto the Ten Commandments, right? So today's lesson about the details of the Sabbath go right back to that honoring the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. So as we study that today, understand that this was a very serious thing. It wasn't optional for the Jews to decide whether or not they could take rest on the seventh day. It wasn't an option. God had it prescribed for them with a penalty if they didn't do it. So that's what we're going to talk about.
I enjoyed the introduction for the first time in a long time.
Yeah,
It wasn't that long ago when we were little.
yeah.
There were blue laws and there were very few things open and
Separated the Lord's Day from the rest of the week. Even when I was younger, which, that seems longer ago now than it used to be. Because it is. That there were things that were not allowed, they were frowned upon if you did them on a Sunday. So we're going to talk about that today, and there's a couple of questions throughout the lesson that it keeps asking us over and over again. I'm going to ask a few of them just to start off, and I'll tell you some of the page numbers if you want to follow along with some of the questions. On page 153, there's a really neat question over in the Golden Text Illuminated. It's a statement that I'm going to ask as a question. Do we acknowledge God as the center of authority in our lives? And if so, what does that look like? Do we acknowledge God as the central authority in our lives? For the Jews, God set them apart from everything from their social classes to their behaviors, their finances, their crops, their farming, their religion. Obviously, everything was centralized around God. Are our lives centered around God? And if so, how do we show that? The other question that the rest of the lesson sort of really gets into is, do we, or can we maybe even a better way, can we live a Sabbath lifestyle? I want you to think about what that may mean as we go through the lesson today. Can we live a lifestyle that reflects the truths of why God gave Israel a Sabbath? Can we do that? Is it possible?
we could.
Are we supposed to?
That's what we're going to get into today, because the lesson takes two different sides to that. It takes one side that says, no, we're different, and the other side that says, God gave it the top 10, and if we don't do something to recognize that, there's a reason for it. Do you keep the rest of the 10 Commandments?
Try.
Try to, don't we? Why do we take this one out? Because it's not convenient, right?
I think too, sometimes we think, okay, that was their Saturday, or actually Friday.
Friday night into Saturday morning, right?
And we got Sunday and we're going, okay.
But do we even treat Sunday like
Yeah.
that anymore? So again, those are great questions that I'm not gonna try to answer all of it, I'm not.
Yeah,
No
but
one wants
my
to
point
think
is,
about it.
we used to, up until about 20, 30 years ago, we treated Sunday like,
Some did, yeah, a lot did, most did it.
there were people that didn't like it when you mowed the grass on Sunday, that didn't feel like you ought to go out on Sunday, that, you know what I mean, day with family. But
Benny's granddad used to tell him if they mowed the yard on Sunday, they'd go to hell with a lawnmower on their back. That's how restricted they were.
I wish Chris Denton was here. I worked for Chris Denton for I don't know how many years. He and I worked together. I farmed for him for I don't know how long, 3 or 4 years when I was in high school and college. When we worked on Sunday, something went bad. Something went downhill, a wheel fell off the tractor, something happened. And I can point to it, and he'll laugh, and he'll remember that, but it's like every time that he asks us to go all tobacco on Sunday, do something on Sunday, invariably something bad happens.
I remember Jim Lewis reading something from Olivet Baptist records from like 1920s, where somebody had sweet potatoes on their porch and were selling them. Well, on Sunday, all they did was take them outside. And they brought it to the board meeting, you to take the sweet potatoes off the porch. They were that serious.
Well, let's get
Well,
it.
that's ridiculous. But
It was serious. So, let's see where the shift has happened. Let's talk about what God says in the Old Testament about it, and we'll see how that applies or doesn't apply to us today. Is that fair? Can we attack it like that?
Well, Stan McDaniel,
Mhm.
he and I talked about this many times. And, he said that he didn't think it was so much about Sunday, because there were people so required to work on Sunday, him being one of them, that it just meant that you had to take time to spend reverence with God.
That's why I asked that last question. How can we live a Sabbath lifestyle? So,
But God didn't tell them, just pick one of the 7 days of the week and take off. He could have.
it
He
goes.
wanted it to be assigned to others.
Let's get into the lesson. We'll look at the text, and Chris is exactly right about that. It was the first day of the week. Why was it the first day of the week for us? The Lord's Day is the first day of the week for us. For God, it was the 7th day of the week. The Sabbath was the last day of the week. We treat it as the first day of the week. Why was it an end of the work instead of at the beginning? So there's a lot of things to think about. A lot of interesting things to think about. So, let's, the first part of Exodus 31 is some of Chris's, I think I won't say favorite scripture, but Chris recognizes Exodus 31 because he always calls out these two guys. The guys that were in charge of the craftsmanship of the temple and the synagogue, I'm sorry, not the temple, but the tabernacle. Those guys, those two guys, God tells Moses, I'm going to put my spirit on them. And they're going to be able to make all this cool stuff that I've already told you about. These guys are going to be the ones that are the craftsmen of it. They're going to make it. They're going to have a team. They're going to put all this stuff together. So Moses, you don't have to worry about that part of it. These guys are getting my spirit. So then we go into this last little bit of his instructions. Now, after Moses gets what we read today, he goes down off the mountain and sees them worshiping the golden calf. So this is it on the mountain. This is it right here. So God finishes this discourse with Moses about the law with this discussion of the Sabbath. So let's go to verse 12 and read 12 and 13.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbath ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doeth sanctify you.
Thank you, Terry. So, what sign did God already give the children of Israel that separated them from the rest of the world? This is a different one. This is another one.
Circumcision.
Thank you, Jessica. Circumcision was the very first sign that God gave Abraham that said, you guys are going to be different. I'm going to give you this. It's going to be the mark of my covenant with you.
But that wasn't visible to everybody.
Merciful.
This is.
Yes. This is marking me as being marked by God. God's giving this so that the rest of the world can see it. This is something that's going to be overtly noticeable. In that culture back then, there wasn't a weekend. There wasn't a break in labor. You worked until you were done, and that was it. What day of the week, it didn't matter. You worked. So this separated them apart from all the other religions, all the other pagan societies, everything else. This was different. There is not another religion in the world like that, except for Judaism and now Christianity. It's very, very different.
And on page 46, it kind of says exactly what you said. It says there was also a witness to their pagan neighbors, and the seventh day was just another day. That's what our society right now has kind of evolved away from that with low church attendance and whatever else you want to fill in the blanket. But our neighbors don't see that.
The reason that there were those blue laws and the prohibition for doing that kind of work or sales on Sabbath was for what Michael said. Is that so as a Christian, you wouldn't look like everybody else that was just doing business and everything else on Sunday. You stood out. You were different from them. Do we stand out at all anymore? Do we
Get to the
look more?
restaurants early.
Do what?
Get to the restaurants early. Chick-fil-A does.
Chick-fil-A does, Hobby Lobby does. There are a couple of little smaller businesses that are not open on the weekends or on Sunday. So do we, I'm torn by this. It bugs me because I like to go out to eat. I like to go to the store. I don't really like to, but sometimes I need to, and Sunday's about the only day I get a chance to sometimes. So what am I doing that separates me from the rest of the world when I do that stuff? Because I believe God still calls us to be separate. Just as He called Israel to be sanctified, set apart, He calls us Christians to be sanctified and set apart too, holy. So, be thinking of those things. I mean, this is a very introspective lesson for me. It's a very tough one for me. And it would be really easy. I'm going to go deer hunt this afternoon. It's my time. I'm going to go deer hunt. But should I? On Sunday? Yeah, but should I? I want to go to the movies. Let's go to the movies this afternoon. Or let's watch a movie this afternoon. Is that separating me from the rest of the world? Or any other day of the week for that matter. But God's calling Israel right here to set themselves apart for an obvious sign to the rest of the world. Think about that as we go to the next section, okay?
Which you think means what?
What?
I mean, stay home all the time, be at church that whole day? I mean, what was he actually calling them to do?
I think that's what we're going to get to.
Okay.
I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're going to get to it. Yeah. But first of all, it was to not do labor. It was to not work. We're going to talk about rest in the next section.
We got to find labor too, don't you?
Yeah, wasn't there some precepts of you couldn't pick up a limb?
There was
That was
a,
a man-made stuff.
yeah, there was a lot of stuff that the Pharisees got on to Jesus for that kind of stuff. So let's look at that word Sabbath before we move into the next section. The Hebrew word there means to stop. It means to cease. It means to not move. So God, when it said God rested on the Sabbath, it didn't mean He took a nap. It didn't mean He put His feet up in the rocking chair or whatever. It means He stopped. It took time to not do what He was doing. What was the creation? The acts of creation. Was God tired? No, God wasn't tired. But God stopped working. That's what that Sabbath word means. It means to stop. So, do we have a time, and we're just going to keep pushing it into today, do we have a time where we just stop? And why would we? What would be the benefit of us stopping?
Full disclosure, I've got blueprints sitting on my kitchen table right now. Getting ready for tomorrow. That's probably, yeah, I wish I'd never come today, but hey, I'm here now, so. But I think it would be restful if I went deer hunting. that's a break from the work. That's just my opinion.
It's a very valid point, because we all kind of have those things.
Right,
Going on.
I mean, what creates rest for you? What creates rest for me?
Because it's a double-sided coin. And I'm not saying I'm any better than that. I've done plenty of work getting ready for Monday on Sunday before. Are we showing a sign to others that we're different? And I don't think we're doing that at all.
But why should we just show a sign on Sunday?
I think it's one way to show, to make a commitment to say, it really is not that much of an imposition to say, I'm not gonna do business on Sunday, you know. And I know at the nuclear plant, they can stop the fishing from happening, there's all kinds of things about that. And you gotta feed your animals on Sunday, that kind of thing, but.
I want the hospital.
Hospitals still have to run.
Yeah, I want them open, I want the ambulance being able to run.
Yeah, so, but we can still show a difference, and it wouldn't be that big an imposition, but we chose not to do it. I chose not to do it.
I've chosen.
But we do show a difference because we're here. That was why I asked that question. What is that difference requirement? When does it,
And I was just thinking about that. In our human nature, we sort of, obviously, we're always sort of going into the gray
not
zone.
human?
Yeah, where if we had two services here, you know, if we had something to do today, well, we'd come to the early service so we'd have more time to do
Do
what
the next.
they are doing that didn't go to church at all. You know what I'm saying? So, but we feel good about it because we checked it off. We went to church, went to early church.
Can we still rest and watch football? Is that okay?
Depends on how worked up you get watching it.
Exactly.
We need to quit, because it's been a bad season.
Well, consequently, years ago, there were a lot of preachers that preached against football.
Mhm. Because of the
Because
Sabbath.
because they did
They
it on
played on
Sunday.
Sunday, that's working on Sunday. You're making these people work on Sunday.
Sandy Koufax
They would pitch on Sunday.
would not pitch, and wouldn't pitch on Saturday.
Oh, well, that's right.
Yeah. Jewish would not pitch on the Sabbath. Hall of Fame pitcher had to sit out a game of the World Series because it was his Sabbath. He didn't do it. You think somebody in the spotlight like that,
Now that's being a witness.
that's the visible sign, right? And in history, that's going to go down as,
I wish we'll talk about
yeah.
But isn't that his Jewish law aspect?
What would it hurt us if we did, Karen?
I'm not saying it would hurt us,
Yeah. What would it help us though if we did?
but I'm not, well, that takes commitment.
Mm-hmm. It sure does.
And that's across the board. It's not about the Sabbath. It's every single day.
Let's look at verses 14, 15, and 16 and see how God treats it. Because God sets this one apart.
He gets pretty serious.
He gets really serious in it.
it. I didn't realize there was a, well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, why don't you read 14, 15, and 16 for me, buddy?
you shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For who, now you going deer hunt? For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death.
Twice, said it twice.
Twice, yeah, he sort of reiterated in case you skipped over it that first time.
I read that wasn't always carried out, but there was one instance that they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, it wasn't always enforced. Because the Sabbath wasn't always enforced. Guess what? When did they start breaking this law? Like immediately. They were
Yeah, because
almost
they stoned
immediate.
people that committed adultery too.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore either.
Let's talk about that for a second. That Jesus, they grabbed the girl in the act of adultery, bring her out, and they said, we're going to stone her right here. What were the Jews supposed to do when somebody did that? They're supposed to stone them, right? Under Roman law, what were they allowed to do? What were they allowed to do under Roman law? Nothing. They couldn't kill her. Why couldn't they kill Jesus? Why couldn't the Jews kill Jesus? Because under Roman law, there was no death penalty. For them, it had to go through Roman courts for there to be a death there's a lot of instances, Stephen got stoned by the Jews who broke Roman law to stone him.
Well, didn't,
There's a very interesting thing about when they picked and choose
What they did.
what they did.
can I read this?
Go ahead, Mike.
This was on page 147, the bottom paragraph.
Am I pacing, Jessica? I'm sorry.
The fact that a person rejected God's Sabbath commandment was a reflection of what was going on in that person's heart.
Yes.
And I think that's why this guy, in the Old Testament, I'm not bringing the modern time, but in the Old Testament, this guy was stoned or killed, and others who broke the commandment were not. It was, why did you do it, rather than you did it? I think, I'm
But I think, to Terry's point, I don't think we're any different. I think we decide what we think is serious. What we don't. So it sounds like this is pretty serious.
It does, doesn't it? There aren't this level of attention and discipline required. God focuses on this, especially at the end. There's a reason. So, verse 16 says, "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations." What's the last part of that verse say? For a perpetual covenant. This was a sign, just like circumcision, of the covenant with them. Them keeping that time for God and not for them was a sign of the covenant. A symbol, a visible display of the covenant relationship they have with God. Now, is there a sign or a visible display, something significant that we display when it comes to our relationship with God that's as drastic as a day of rest? Look at that, perpetual covenant. That's an important phrase that's at the end of that last sentence in chapter in verse 14. 16. Do we take our covenant with God that seriously? I'm not saying we have to do it on that. I'm not saying we have to do it on Sunday. But do you take that covenant with God that seriously that you're willing to risk death, punishment, to keep it? Not keep it. How seriously do you take your relationship with God? Is it frivolous? God will forgive me, I messed this up, it's all right. I'm all good. I come to church on Sunday, I'm good. This was something that made that covenant binding. It's thick, it's strong. That you break this, it's your life. So is a day of rest worth our life? Sometimes we need it. Physically, people will tell you, and the state of Illinois just passed a new law, starts January 1st, that you can't force somebody to work 7 days in a row. Thanks, state of Illinois, appreciate that very much, which is very unusual. There are a lot of people I know that have been forced to work 7 days in a row, 14 days in a row, 21 days in a row, for years and years and years. Now the state of Illinois says you can't do that anymore. There'll be a law that you will.
Did they read this?
They may have read this.
They must have.
Do you think the state of Illinois is actually reading this?
I'm sure that's where their motivation was.
Don't they also have a purge law coming soon too?
I don't know about that.
A what?
Where, a purge law where you're not gonna get, like, for certain crimes,
Oh, yeah.
they only have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Or you don't get.
Like
charged with
manslaughter.
crime.
Yeah, like manslaughter, there's like
Yeah,
less.
rapists
Yeah.
and drug dealers.
Yeah. The state of Illinois, I wasn't meaning to get into that ball of worms, or can of worms, or ball of wax.
Well, my daughter's moving over there,
Yeah.
and I'm just like,
But yeah, but for 7 days, you can't force that guy to work that last 7 days. You can do it voluntarily, but you can't force him to.
And you know, in this, just sort of rereading through the scripture here, it starts with the word observe, that I'm translating NIV here.
Yes.
And so he doesn't give a list of mandates or you must do this, you must do that. and that's your sign of observant. He just says observe it because it's holy to you, and don't do any work.
That's it.
But there's not a requirement, you have to go to the 10 o'clock service, or, you
Nope.
know.
Well, then we go back to Mike's question, what's work?
Yeah, that's exactly
What's
right.
work?
And that's where the minutia of the rabbinical laws came in. Whether it's, they could only travel over water. So if they put a bucket of water underneath their camel, they got away with traveling over water. Seriously, that's how they did it. So we don't want to get into that, picking and choosing what work is and what
My
work isn't.
grandmother cooked Sunday lunch on Saturday.
Yes.
For this reason?
Yeah, because that's just what you did. You didn't spend your day in the kitchen on Sunday.
Well, I was just thinking.
Now, she still had all of us and all the dishes to wash, so you still picked.
Well, that's what I was just thinking of, you know, if someone had people at their house on Sunday for lunch, witnessing to them, worshiping the Lord together, does that really work? You know, I mean,
That sets you apart.
it sets you apart, yeah.
There's somebody working in an orphanage feeding. you know,
Sometimes,
you-
all the
you-
time.
You could draw that line, but you're gonna have to do things on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's about the outward side and what it
Yes.
means to you.
The observance.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's probably as much as what's in your heart to the outside.
You like doing it, it's not considered work.
I've heard people say that. Yep.
See, you like cooking,
Ever get a day off?
you like cooking and then
Yeah.
you're doing it, it's not really considered work because you're enjoying what you're doing.
Go to page 148 for a second. Second paragraph. The emphasis in the Mosaic Law concerning the Sabbath was on physical rest and spiritual refreshment. As we all know, but need to be reminded, our bodies need rest, and neglecting it can be both physically and emotionally draining. If not forced to take a day off, some people never would. Consequently, ordinary work was to be laid aside one day out of 7. I think you should underline that word, ordinary. That answers all of these discussions that we were just having. Ordinary, the day-to-day, that stuff that you have to do day in, day out, that needs to stop so you can focus on something else.
So that means cleaning and cooking.
That's right, girl.
Can-
Preaching,
We get one day
preaching.
of break.
Are you listening?
When Jesus meets with the Pharisees and they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath, what does he say about the day of the Sabbath?
He is the Lord.
He's the Lord of it, and the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The precepts of the Sabbath are for our benefit.
Well, a new study just came out about Alzheimer's, and one of the most common denominators across the entire disease is rest.
Yes.
And it sets it into hours even. And statistically, how much, I mean, I'm done. I'm cooked.
Unless you rest during your life, well, that's what you
And
do.
the older you get, the more rest is required to stay it off. And
there
it's
is
like
nice
8 to 9
modern-
hours a night.
That's the
Well, I
modern-
didn't sleep that many hours in my entire life.
Until it comes.
Yeah, you had said that.
That's the modern day death penalty.
And that's how we kill ourselves.
That's how it goes.
That's right, and that report, if you read it, just reeks that.
This is how we are killing ourselves by not living that Sabbath lifestyle. God gave this for a reason, more than one reason. And we choose to ignore it. We choose to make rules around it, like the Pharisees did. It's exactly the same that they were doing with that whole bucket of water underneath the camel or the donkey. They made their reasons and excuses.
Take that out of the water.
Under their wagon, whatever. They were traveling over water.
Here.
Yeah, look, fix it down.
You can always find a way around
You
that.
can find a way. When we think we know better, and let's start with this. When we think we know better than God, we try to find a way. God's very clear. And I make it low. God is clear. I'm not. And we can argue that all day long, but that's the truth. Is that God's clear about what he expects us to do, to be different, to set time aside for him, to honor him and glorify him, to be different from everybody else. And when we look like everybody else, that doesn't do it.
What, and I'm asking because I don't know, what was their common structure of a week spending time with the Lord? Because, you know, that to me is one of our mainstays, is to try to teach each one of us to spend daily time with the Lord in prayer and the Word, and did they,
Very different.
was that?
And it changed over time.
a
Right now,
structure
Moses
for them?
was the key to all that, and when Moses met, and when God met with Moses in the tabernacle, which hadn't been built yet.
Yeah, but they had to get up and collect manna at one point,
Yeah.
and they were to pray to God the whole time they were collecting manna.
Yes.
But yeah, we checked.
Yeah, and it changed throughout their march in the desert. It changed when they built the tabernacle. It changed when they built the temple. It all changed over time. It talked to the Jewish aspect about the mezuzah that was supposed to be hanging from their doorpost, which contained a little box that contained scripture. And they were supposed to reflect on that every time they came in and out of the house. Jessica's roommate in college had one on our college dorm room door. Remember Kim's little mezuzah?
Yes. You
So-
said our dorm, it was not your dorm.
Not my dorm. Not my dorm. Never did I spend the night in that dorm. Just telling you. Not my dorm. Their dorm.
She corrected that quick.
She did very fast. Okay. So the Sabbath was to be holy to the Lord. That meant that it was to be different from other days, especially as it related to physical refreshment and worship. Let's go down to verse 17 and 18. Who would read that?
It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tablets of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God.
He signs it at the end. This is it. After he says these last words, this is to be a sign for you forever, forever and ever, because I made heaven and earth in 6 days, and I rested and was refreshed. What did the lesson say that word refreshed meant? It didn't mean like getting a cold drink of water. What did it mean? It said he breathed.
To breathe.
It means to breathe. It's to sit back, do nothing, and do what? Breathe. What's the word for breath that's translated different words in the Bible? In Hebrew, it's ruach. It's also translated spirit. That's the same word. So God communed with himself, with his spirit. He breathed. On this day of no work, that's what he did. If God gives that example about himself doing that, what should we do? That's God's example of what he did on the seventh day. That doesn't end when Jesus comes and says that he fulfills the law. This is God perpetually. God did this on the seventh day. Does that slam this idea home with you about this day of rest? That it's not something that can be done away with. It's not something that can be ignored. It's not something that can be set aside because it's inconvenient. God did it. And he communed with himself, the Spirit. He breathed. That's something that's very, very important for us to comprehend. Difficult? Is it impossible? How today are we going to live a Sabbath lifestyle? I'll ask again. Now, tonight we're going to get into the golden text. So if you want to study ahead and get ready for tonight, the golden text illuminated in the heart of the lesson, that's where we're going to focus tonight. Because it talks about that. Are we really his covenant people? Are we willing to put this kind of stuff into practice? The writer of the golden text says that we have a responsibility as Christians to take this a whole lot more seriously. So I want you guys, if you get a chance, study that. That's what we're talking about. So, what does the Sabbath lifestyle look like?
Maybe buying your groceries on Monday instead of Sunday afternoon.
I think maybe intentional.
Intentional, is that the right, and I think that's the right word.
I know a pastor whose Sabbath is Thursday.
Advance Tuesday.
Robert McKinney Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, how can I rest on Sunday? I got two churches. And it made sense to me. I think it just has to be something intentional. Something that you don't put on a t-shirt, something that somebody says, hey, I noticed you do this on this day. Or I noticed you do this for an hour every day. You know, it's something that's intentional, that it's important. I'm realizing that after listening to all this, it's really important that we do that. What it looks like, I guess, is depending on the individual. But
What's the difference, and we'll talk about this tonight too, the difference between the Lord's Day and Saturday? In observance, what's the difference? And we'll talk about that too. Any other questions? We asked more than we answered, which is good. It's a good
I
thing.
thought Ms. Debbie made a good point earlier. It shouldn't just be the Sabbath day. It should be all aspects of our lives. That's the way it's supposed to be, you know.
It's gonna show, right?
Guess we need to pray that our football team makes it prime time. And we just.
After dark on Sunday, yes, that would be fine.
Well, here's the other thing, just like, and I'll just use Benny and I. When Benny's working himself to death, and especially when the kids were little, well, the one day he had for rest was the one day he had to spend with the kids. Whether it be a basketball game or, you know, whatever, so still that day of rest a lot of times did not turn into that. Because it was the only time he had to where he would have been resting.
Do you think the Jews would have said the
So
same
we
thing?
do it to ourselves.
Yeah, I think they would have said the same thing. But this is the only day I've got to do this or that. I'm not saying that you're wrong.
No,
I'm
no,
not saying
and
that you're
I'm
a
not
bad
saying we're right, I'm just saying it's fact.
thing. Yeah, I'm saying that we have put ourselves, and it's a choice that we make. Whether it's our jobs or it's our responsibilities with our families, we have designed a society where it isn't convenient. It doesn't reflect, our schedules don't reflect that central authority that God is. Our work schedules don't reflect that. Our day-to-days, does our checkbook reflect it? Do the other aspects of our life reflect that God is the central authority? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Not just our day-to-day and our time, but does every aspect of our life reflect God being the central authority? Does what I wear, does what I say come out of my mouth, does where I spend my time, does any of those things reflect God being the central authority? That's where we need to get to the root of the matter. Good question. Excellent comment. All right, let's be dismissed. Ms. Sandra has brought us some snacks in the back. Bruce, will you close us out of Sunday school?
Let's pray. Father God, we're just in awe of your goodness toward us, Lord, and Father, how confused we make it, and how simple you make it, that we are to be focused on you, and that you are to be the true center of our universe, literally and personally, Lord. And Father, you're so gracious to forgive us for our shortcomings, and we know that they're many, but Father, we rest in the only hope of the world, which is in your Son, Jesus, because you have regarded our helpless estate. Father, we love you and we thank you. We thank you for your word, which is living and continues to teach us and to guide us today. Father, we pray for our church service. Pray for Brother Brian as he brings the message. Pray for us that it will be receptive to what you will have us to do. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.